The first thing they heard wasn't a drill sergeant's bark or a rifle's bolt. It was the upbeat, brassy swing of a Benny Goodman record. June 4th, 1943. Norfolk Naval Base, Virginia. The steel deck trembled beneath their boots as 2,500 men of the Afrika Korps shuffled down the gangway, salt spray stinging their sunburned faces. They had rehearsed this moment during the long Atlantic crossing, the jeers, the spitting crowds, perhaps rifle butts in their backs. Instead, they stepped into a scene that stopped them cold. Black dockworkers and white foremen stood side by side, shouting orders over the screech of crane cables. Women in coveralls guided forklifts loaded with grain sacks stacked higher than a man. Somewhere beyond the warehouses, a brass band played swing music, bright and carefree, as if war were happening on another planet. The German prisoners scanned the harbor with disbelieving eyes. This was supposed to be a nation crippled by racial division, teetering on economic collapse. At least that's what Goebbels had promised. Yet here stood a port larger than Hamburg, moving cargo with mechanical precision that made Blom and Voss look primitive. One sergeant would later write in a smuggled letter, "If this is how America looks during war, we have already lost." In that single glance across Norfolk's piers, the first crack appeared in an ideology built on lies. What these men would witness over the coming months would shatter it completely. The war in North Africa had ended badly for Germany. Rommel's vaunted Afrika Korps, once the pride of the Wehrmacht, had been squeezed between Montgomery's 8th Army and Eisenhower's forces landing in Morocco and Algeria. By May 1943, over 250,000 Axis troops surrendered in Tunisia, the largest capitulation in German military history to that point. These were not green conscripts. Many had fought across 2 continents, from the sands of Libya to the hills of Sicily. They knew hardship, they knew discipline, but nothing in their training prepared them for captivity in America. The crossing itself had been tense. Packed into the holds of Liberty ships, the prisoners expected torpedoes from their own U-boats. Instead, they arrived untouched, testimony to Allied naval supremacy the Reich's propaganda never acknowledged. As land appeared on the horizon, rumors spread through the cramped compartments. America would work them to death in mines. They would be paraded through cities for public humiliation. Some whispered darker fears, summary executions disguised as accidents. None of it happened. Before we dive deeper into this astonishing story, if you're captivated by untold moments from World War II, hit that subscribe button and smash the like. Drop a comment telling us where you're watching from. We love hearing from history lovers around the world. Your support keeps these hidden stories alive. Norfolk overwhelmed them not with cruelty, but with scale. The naval base sprawled across 4,300 acres, a forest of cranes and warehouses that dwarfed anything in Kiel or Bremerhaven. In 1943 alone, Norfolk handled over 30 million tons of cargo, 3 times Hamburg's peak pre-war capacity. The prisoners watched endless lines of trucks hauling steel, grain and ammunition, a supply chain so vast it seemed to mock the very concept of shortage. Kriegsmarine officers who once believed in Germany's industrial might stood silent, recalculating everything they thought they knew. Feldwebel Heinrich Müller, a composite drawn from dozens of testimonies, would become one witness among thousands. A baker's son from Düsseldorf, he had joined the Wehrmacht at 19, believing the promises of glory and Lebensraum. Now, 24, sunburned and exhausted, he stood on American soil for the first time. The guards who herded them toward waiting trucks carried rifles casually, slung over shoulders instead of aimed at backs. No one shouted, no one struck them. Müller felt a strange vertigo, as if the rules of war had been rewritten overnight. The trucks rolled inland, and through canvas flaps the prisoners glimpsed a country at war that looked nothing like war-torn Europe. Neat suburban houses with mowed lawns, children riding bicycles in circles laughing, a woman hanging laundry, white sheets flapping in the breeze like surrender flags no one needed to wave. At a rail crossing, The convoy stopped while a freight train rumbled past 80 cars long, each one loaded with tanks, jeeps, and artillery pieces still wrapped in factory grease. Müller counted until he lost track. "They build faster than we can destroy," someone muttered behind him. The trains came next, not cattle cars but passenger coaches with cushioned seats and windows that opened. The paradox deepened with every mile. From Richmond to Baltimore, the rail line cut through the industrial heart of America, and the prisoners saw it all. The Glen L. Martin aircraft plant rose like a cathedral of aluminum and glass. B-26 Marauders lined up on the tarmac in rows of 20, 30, 40. In 1 week, Martin's workers completed more bombers than Heinkel produced in a month. The prisoners pressed their faces to the glass, counting, calculating, despairing. At station stops, American civilians stared back with curiosity, not hatred. In Roanoke, a vendor sold apples and coffee to passengers while prisoners watched from their coach. A little girl waved. Her mother smiled and waved too. Müller felt something crack inside him, not quite shame, not quite relief, just confusion. Where was the enemy they had been trained to hate? A guard noticed his expression and shrugged. "You boys look like you could use some rest," he said in rough German, then handed him a canteen of cold water. Müller drank and said nothing, afraid that speaking might reveal how deeply the gesture had unsettled him. The abundance visible from the rails was obscene by European standards. Automobile dealerships packed with new Fords and Chevrolets, grain elevators towering over small towns fat with wheat and corn, diners where families ate hamburgers stacked with lettuce and tomato meals that would feed a German family for a week, consumed and discarded in 20 minutes. At one stop, Müller watched a porter bite into an apple, chew twice, then toss the half-eaten fruit into a trash bin. That single gesture, the casual waste of food, stayed with him longer than any propaganda lecture ever had. Numbers told a story propaganda could not rewrite. By 1943, the United States produced 600 million tons of coal, annually double the entire Reich's output. America's rail network moved 2.5 million passengers daily, while simultaneously hauling unprecedented freight tonnages. Oil production reached 1.8 billion barrels per year, compared to Germany's 33 million. The prisoners did not need economists to explain these statistics. They saw them roll past the windows, mile after mile, an industrial symphony that never stopped playing. The psychological weight of that journey crushed something essential in many prisoners. They had been taught that Germany's defeat was impossible, that willpower and discipline would overcome material disadvantage. But staring at Ford's River Rouge plant from a train window, watching assembly lines produce a bomber every 63 minutes, willpower seemed like a child's fairy tale. One officer scribbled in a diary later found by Red Cross inspectors, "We are not fighting an army. We are fighting a continent that has learned to make war the way other nations make peace effortlessly, abundantly, without strain." When the trains finally stopped and the prisoners disembarked at camps scattered across Texas, Kansas, and beyond, they braced for the real captivity to begin. Barbed wire and guard towers confirmed they were prisoners, but everything else defied expectation. At Camp Hearn in Texas, rows of whitewashed barracks stood in orderly lines, each equipped with electric lights, ceiling fans, and bunks with mattresses, not straw pallets, actual mattresses. A hospital wing gleamed in the distance, its windows reflecting the afternoon sun. Müller touched the light switch in his barracks and watched the bulb flicker to life. He had grown up in a Düsseldorf tenement where electricity was rationed. Now, as a prisoner, he had power at his fingertips. The medical care astonished them most. Within days of arrival, every prisoner received a physical examination. American doctors and captured German physicians worked side by side, speaking in halting German and English, comparing techniques with professional respect. When infections appeared, American medics administered penicillin, a drug so rare in Germany that most frontline soldiers had never seen it. By 1944, the United States produced over 20 billion units of penicillin, while Germany's pharmaceutical industry struggled to synthesize even crude versions. To men who had watched comrades die of infected wounds in the desert, this medicine seemed like a kind of magic, or worse, proof that they had been fighting on the wrong side all along. Then came the food. The first meal at Camp Hearn silenced the mess hall. Fried eggs, bacon, toast with butter, coffee with sugar and cream. Müller stared, fearing a trick, a final meal. The guards ate the same food nearby, joking and smoking, making the abundance unmistakably real. The portions were enormous 3,400 calories a day, more than double civilian rations in Germany. Men who had grown lean on ersatz bread and watery soup now faced meals that would have been feasts in peacetime Berlin, gaining weight in captivity while families starved at home. The Christmas menu of 1943 became legend: roast turkey with chestnut dressing, gravy-soaked potatoes, peas, cranberry sauce, pumpkin pie, cigars. It was policy, not propaganda. The Geneva Convention required adequate nutrition, and America interpreted adequate with excess that Müller found both astonishing and cruelly ironic. Work details revealed another paradox. Volunteers earned 80 cents a day in camp scrip, spent at canteens stocked with cigarettes, soap, paper, harmonicas. By 1944, nearly 200,000 German POWs worked nationwide, filling labor shortages and witnessing abundance everywhere: cotton in Texas, corn in Iowa, peanuts in Georgia. Müller's detail harvested cotton outside Hearn under the Texas sun. Farmer Earl Thompson watched warily, then brought watermelon. Soon came sandwiches, thick ham and cheese on white bread. Thompson's son asked about Germany and the war. Müller answered carefully, but the boy listened without judgment. Respect replaced suspicion. Hearn itself shattered illusions. A town of 4,000 had lit streets, full shelves, movies, diners serving weekday steaks. Müller saw a child drop an ice cream cone and watched the mother buy another without hesitation. That reflex affluence spoke louder than statistics and quietly terrified him. Sensory details accumulated into grief: fresh-cut grass, baseball bats cracking on a day off, women laughing outside a beauty parlor, hair curled, dresses pressed. This was not a nation straining under sacrifice. Germany, Müller realized, lost to an opponent that could outproduce and outlast without breaking. Education and art deepened the transformation. Universities behind barbed wire taught math, literature, English. Music and theater flourished. Guards and prisoners listened together. Müller played harmonica, sketched, learned. Creating something beautiful in captivity proved the soul could endure, even when the body was caged. The most disarming encounters happened beyond the wire. Local families, especially in rural areas, began inviting work details to Sunday dinners. A farmer's wife in Minnesota baked pies for the threshing crew Germans who had been enemies 6 months earlier. In Kansas, a Lutheran congregation invited prisoners to Christmas services, singing Silent Night together in German and English. Müller sat in a pew beside a man whose son was fighting in France, and when the hymn ended, the man shook his hand. No words passed between them, but the gesture said enough. "You are not my enemy. You are a man far from home." These moments accumulated into a kind of conversion. Müller and thousands like him began to see America not as a propaganda caricature, but as a living contradiction, a nation flawed and imperfect, yet fundamentally decent. The racial segregation they witnessed troubled them. Black soldiers and workers faced indignities that contradicted American ideals. Yet even that hypocrisy revealed something important. Americans argued openly about their failures. There were no secret police silencing dissent, no midnight arrests for questioning the government. The very existence of debate suggested a society confident enough to criticize itself. By the spring of 1945, News from Europe grew darker, cities bombed into rubble, the Red Army closing in from the east, the final collapse approaching like a slow-motion avalanche. In the camps, prisoners listened to radio broadcasts and read newspapers provided by their captors, another strange liberty. Some refused to believe the reports. Others wept quietly in their bunks. Müller read about the liberation of concentration camps and felt a nausea that had nothing to do with food. He had not known. Or perhaps he had chosen not to know. Either way, the knowledge arrived too late, and with it came a shame no amount of decent treatment could erase. When Germany surrendered in May 1945, the prisoners faced an uncertain future. Repatriation would take years, the camps remained open, and life continued in its strange rhythm of captivity and comfort. Müller kept working the Thompson farm, kept attending English classes, kept playing harmonica on Saturday nights. He no longer thought of himself as a soldier waiting to go home. He thought of himself as a man suspended between two worlds, one destroyed, the other indifferent to his return. By war's end, over 425,000 German POWs had passed through American camps. They contributed 90 million man-days of labor, harvesting crops, building roads, working in lumber mills and canning factories. Some returned to Germany determined to rebuild it as a democracy, carrying memories of American generosity and abundance. Others applied for visas to return permanently, believing their futures lay not in the ruins of Europe, but in the land that had fed them as enemies. Müller chose the latter. In 1950, he emigrated to Texas, married a schoolteacher from Waco, and opened a bakery that still stands today. The paradox was complete. These men had crossed the Atlantic in defeat, expecting punishment. Instead, they found a nation so confident in its values, it treated enemies with dignity. America's greatest weapon was not the atomic bomb or the B-17. It was the quiet demonstration that prosperity and freedom could coexist, that a society built on those principles could afford generosity even in war. The prisoners returned home not as broken men, but as witnesses to an alternative future, one where abundance replaced scarcity, where debate replaced diktat, where even enemies could be offered second chances. Müller's final letter to his sister, written in 1948 before he left Germany for good, captured the transformation. I came to America as a prisoner and learned more in captivity than in all my years of soldiering. They did not defeat us with cruelty. They defeated us by showing us what we could have become if we had chosen differently. That lesson, Greta, is the one I will carry for the rest of my life. The sound of engines, once symbols of the Wehrmacht's might, had become whispers of a future built not on conquest, but on cooperation. In the end, the prisoners learned what the Reich never could. The true strength lies not in the ability to dominate, but in the capacity to rebuild, to forgive, and to offer hope even to those who once stood as enemies.